Hey, it's your main man, Mega, and you're tuned in to another episode of the Vintage House Show on WNUR FM 89.3 and HD1, WNUR.org, and on Facebook Live, Twitch.tv, The Vintage House Show, and YouTube. The Vintage House Show is the premier on air radio show and podcast dedicated to illuminating and preserving the lives, music, careers, and history of house music pioneers. We're powered by the Modern Dance Music Research and Archiving Foundation, the only repository in the United States dedicated solely to the study, preservation, and the celebration of the genres of house and dance music. Our mission, in short, is to preserve the memories, the memorabilia, and artifacts that support the sustainability and the growth of the culture. I am your host for tonight's special episode where I get to interview my co hosts and executive producers of the Vintage House Show in honor of International Women's History. And so, with that, I'd like to bring on both Lowery Branch and Lauren Lowery. Come on aboard. How are you?
Hey, everybody. That's the wrong end of the mic. Let's try it that way. What's up, everybody?
Way to kick off the show. I'm, of course, honored to have you both on an episode of the Vintage House Show where it's rare these days that all three of us are together, but we have given great homage and attention to women's history, particularly in the genre of house music.
Yes.
And so thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you. It's fun to hang out over Zoom.
It is indeed. And it's always good to be in person, first and foremost. But I'm glad to have you all in my company in any way, shape, or form. I want to kick off this show by quoting a report that ultimately suggests there's a lack of equity in the music industry,
right,
broadly, right? And so no big surprise there, unfortunately. The report, which was compiled in 2021, suggested that only 14.4% of songwriters, again, across the entire music industry, were women. And this number hasn't changed very significantly over time, with women making up just about 12.7% of the songwriters that were evaluated over a 10-year run of the study, resulting in about 6.8 men to every one woman songwriter. To me, that's pretty atrocious. Your thoughts?
Well, how does that, I wonder what that breaks down to when you look at the house music community. I'm guessing just based on the music that I buy and the people that I engage, that it's probably even less. I don't know. What do you think?
Lauren, thoughts?
Yes. And I think, I'm happy we're having this conversation. Kevin, thanks so much for inviting us to come to your show and have a quick discussion about sort of equity, women's roles, maybe improvements, things that we can do ourselves to improve sort of the business and culture around house music. So, certainly there's no question in my mind that across the board, that is correct. Those figures would be absolutely correct. From behind the scenes to, on the decks, producing, etc. I think we probably will see a very low number as it pertains to maybe just songwriting, but again, I would assume that would be this case across the board. If we looked at sort of, let's say, look at the festival circuit and DJs, women DJs, how many women DJs were at Lala, at ARC, etc. I think it probably has grown without question over the years. And Lori can probably attest to that more. We've had several discussions with wonderful female DJs starting out in house music, but we haven't really had that many, let's say, who were all the vocalists, who were, all the people behind the scene, not just, some of the songwriters. Are they, getting the right percentages when it pertains to their royalties afterwards, that kind of thing. And, I do think that we should, this conversation is absolutely necessary because people should sort of think about that more. We don't always think about that vocalist. We don't always think about that songwriter. We probably never really think about that songwriter when we're talking about house music, maybe in other capacities, but maybe in house music, we're not thinking about who wrote that. Certainly, that's my thought. I could be wrong, but 14%
Mhm.
sounds absolutely in line.
Right. I also think I agree with your point around not sort of giving credit to the women who make the music. So not only the writers, but the singers. I mean, if it wasn't for women, especially Black women singers, house music would not be what house music is. Some of our most iconic songs are featuring Black women or women singing. And I know that Renee Giroux, I'm sorry, I may not be pronouncing her name right. She wrote an article a couple of years ago about how Black women have gotten left out of the history of house music, especially with their credits. And I know specifically, she talked about Martha Wash and Lita Holloway, whose voices, I think it was Martha Wash, whose voice was used, by CNC Music Factory, and they put in some nice other person in the music video, and people just not getting credit. So it's not just a matter of overlooking folks; it's a matter of sort of willful intent to exclude voices. And so I think we can't ignore that it's not by accident that women are not involved in these roles. Women are often excluded intentionally. I mean, it's the same story. You can think about Black people in white industries, where there was active rules and active legislation and active exclusionary tactics to say, no, you may not participate because we don't want you to have credit. We don't want you to take part because that means less for us. And I think that our community is no different. While we're more open and more loving, it's still part of the larger society. And so we are just sort of a microcosm of what happens in the general society. You're going to have prejudice and racism and sexism, and that's unfortunate. And it is something. I'm glad we're having this discussion because, like, what do we do? It's not just up to me to counteract that. Just like it's not just up to Black people to counteract racism. I'm not the problem. It's the problem is the people who are creating those barriers, right? So who's taking a look at that?
The
Who's
oppressors certainly are those that are at the root cause, and they're having their grip on the continuation and succession of these policies and practices. And I think it's important to note I started with songwriting, and using that statistic because songwriting can and tends to be a very lucrative part of the music economy, right? And so it's certainly at the core of how uh, control and power, is partially distributed. But you're absolutely right, both of you, in this notion that it's not just about songwriting. It's not just about house music. It's not just about the music industry, but globally, and almost unilaterally, our societies have been set up for hundreds of years to the exclusion of women. And I'm just thrilled that there is a consciousness, right, that is being put into the universe today. And certainly we give the attention to this month, but year round now there is a consciousness, and the hashtag embrace equity is what is driving this conversation and this consciousness. So that's one way things are changing. um, there's clearly, you're both right, there's no one person that can affect the change, but each of you is doing very important work. I'm very proud of you both, and I'm curious about personally what are some of the things each of you are doing to foster greater inclusivity as women, and for other women in the genre specifically of house music.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that, Kevin. And you're right. We all have to do our part. So, what does that look like? And for me, so here's my role in the house music community in Chicago. I obviously I'm a DJ. I consider myself a house historian, thanks to Lowery claiming me so 7 years ago, and me embracing that title. Um, and I think that wearing those two hats is important. So, for in one hat as a DJ, it's important for me to make sure that I am accessible to women who have come up behind me, and that's a lot of women because I've been in this field for a very long time, over 40 years. So that means that I take phone calls. That means that I mentor. I had a young woman who called me just last week. I've seen her, and I used to work with her years ago. And she said to a friend, you think I could reach out to her? And he's like, of course you can. She's totally accessible. And I sent her a note, and we spent like a good hour on the phone just talking about what does it mean for her to like want to be in the field as a house music DJ. What was my advice? How could I support her? And I think that one of the things as women we underestimate is sort of our own value to other women, and so it's important that whatever you have, as a gift, as a DJ or a musician or a writer, there's someone who can learn from that. And I know that I would think about myself, and just was like, well, I'm not telling them anything they don't already know, and that's just not true. Those experiences are invaluable, sort of like how you got your start and who were your mentors and what was important to you and what do you think is important to your audience. So as a DJ, for me, that means making space for the people as a mentor, as a friend, as someone who they can bounce ideas off of, and also making physical space. So I'm working with, good girls. That's me, DJ Lady D, and Hannah Vidi Girl. To actually this weekend, for example, coming up, we have an open deck where we're saying female DJs, females and non-binary DJs, come on through. First come, first serve. Get some time on the decks. So you have our undivided attention. You have the attention of your peers. And so we are trying to make more and more opportunities for that. And other women are too, by having all female lineups. And why does that sound so odd? Like an all female lineup when we see so many shows where it's all male lineups and no one thinks twice about that. So, I'm doing that. And the other thing I'll quickly say is, as a house music historian, it's really important for me to get the stories. So that's what Vintage House is about, right? Unpacking stories, getting people to tell their truth, and to be able to tell it in their voice, and to be able to help unpack their memories, and to help them to understand why they're important, why you are important. Okay, you are important to this story, and your memory is worthy to be preserved and celebrated. So ensuring that we have those women's voices, especially those who are a little bit older who may not be with us. How many shows have we done where we've interviewed people and a year later they're gone, right? So we have to collect these stories. And so as a historian, it's really important for me to get those women's voices, and all women, women's voices, no matter what race, sexual orientation, part of the city that you come from. I'm on a mission to gather as many as possible.
Powerful work, and certainly work that's having an impact on the genre and society at large, I would say.
I hope so.
Absolutely. Lauren, your thoughts.
You know, I'd like for us, I think we're kind of going from history to current day as it pertains to sort of unpacking the subject. I'd like to begin with history. And so if I start from the beginning of Lauren Lowery's consciousness around house music, the business of house music, and the DJs in house music. I tell this story. I've told this story once or twice before, but I knew Lori Branch's mom. She was my teacher, and she was kind enough to have us over her house as a young person. One of the few teachers who ever had me in their house, their actual house. And so I felt like I remembered and I always sort of recognized whatever the branch people were doing. And I remember sometime after school, someone said, Lori Branch is a DJ. So very young, I was probably still in high school. Like Lori Branch is a DJ. Lori lives in New York now. She's a DJ. And I remember not understanding what they meant by that because I hadn't heard any DJs that were women, through my career as a house music hanger outer, So when you think about sort of when I think my impact to, the moments that I learned more about house music, 1981, Mendel High School, Quigley South High School, and everyone's basement, there were no women DJs on any deck doing anything. So when someone said Lori Branch is DJing something, it took me a minute. I kind of almost I remember it. I remember thinking about it. I remember sort of putting it out of my head. Like, I'm not sure what they said Lori's doing, but she's in New York. Okay. So I was like, I don't know what's going on. It never dawned on me that this could be an actual profession. Someone is doing this who is a woman.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm certain that, I might have heard or, in my day, Angie Hurley went to my high school. I heard she was, trying to DJ, but it didn't seem to me like this was something that was very serious, that, she was doing it. It was like, oh, her brother's doing it. Maybe she's doing it. It wasn't like it was a very serious discussion around women in house music. And so from that point on, you think about that and you realize, okay, there are women DJs who are just radio DJs, but who's spinning? Who's making, creative, sort of music, that, you hear at all the parties. So I recognize there's a trajectory. There was some time before I even heard of any other woman DJ doing anything. And, certainly if we then go from the vocalists to my college career, um, there was this wonderful house music song called Like This. And my sorority sister, Kim Salter, was the vocalist on that. And she had dropped out of school, and I was like, "That's Kim. That's Kim. Who's the vocalist on there?" And I'm like, that's Chippy. That's Chip. That's not like who. What she's singing? Like, why is she not getting any love? Like, I don't know anything like about, you know, Kim Salter, my sore, getting real pub, real love. Not sure if she got paid for that, that kind of thing. You're thinking like this is her music, but we talk about Chippy on that. We don't talk about who the woman vocalist was. So, I
That's right.
recognized right away that there's some true disparity in our thought process around house music and women. And she wrote Like This. So she's a co-writer on this, in which she suggests in our interview with her in I think 2021, which everyone should go back in the archive of the house music, the Vintage House Show archive, maybe on YouTube, maybe on a few other places, where you can hear her conversation around, her being able to be compensated for that, who helped her in making sure that she was compensated for her lyrics on that, and that she continues to obtain royalties from that song. But no one talks about that. No one has a word to say about it. And I will tell you, there were several things that other house music vocalists, including Kim, who wouldn't allow me to ask questions about their interaction behind the scenes in the music industry was so traumatic. And we can only guess what was happening in studio, what was happening around production, what was happening around, the creation of this music, what was happening to these women, that they refused to be interviewed about it. I have a colleague who is an archivist today, who is a vocalist on one of the house music songs, who does not want to be interviewed about her interaction in house music because she wants to forget about it. She doesn't even want to remember what happened to her during that time frame and what she was excited about, that kind of thing. So I think there's so much we could do and say, and really sort of we think about sort of the history, starting from the beginning. Where were women? Why weren't they celebrated and put out there more? And then what was going on? What was happening during that time in which many women today didn't even still 40 years later don't want to be interviewed about it. So, we definitely have some unpacking to do, and some conversations to have around women from the beginning. where they were, what was happening. Because I know there were more in the production, on those production teams with these lyrics. Where are they?
Right, right. I would agree. Can I jump in, Kevin?
Go,
Because I
go
I
for it.
want to I want to say that Lauren, you're so on point with that uh, that exclusion. It's what I was talking about. It's like I don't know if it was willful, but it feels like a byproduct of just sexism within our community. So I often bring up Adrienne Jett's name because Adrienne was a friend of mine. So who was Adrienne Jett? Do either of you know?
I don't know her.
Right. Okay. So she was the voice on Your Love. So before
Jamie
Jamie
Prince.
Principle actually recorded it by himself, and even the recording that he had of just himself, she's singing background vocals, and you could especially hear her voice when it's that part that goes up sort of towards the chorus. I need your love. Anyway, Adrienne never gets credit. She never gets credit. She also sang um, on It's a Sensation. Don't You Know It's a
Yes.
Sensation was a song that was put out by Ron Hardy, and she did vocals on other tracks, but never gets any love, never gets any credit. Can you imagine if Shaka Khan, uh, if some guy who was in Rufus was getting all the credit for Shaka Khan's voice on the songs that she made famous? It's like that's what happens in our community. It happens way too often where the women who are singing these songs, like no one knows their names, you
So,
know?
so what I this is
Hmm.
it's a hurtful point, to think that people are being exploited, and to know that they've been exploited, right, and to have been omitted from attribution. um, One of the questions it raises about house music in particular is that a lot of the music business education came from the school of hard knocks. And what I mean by that is, right, people took steps they might have or may not have been successful in getting a record released or being booked as a DJ at some of the parties, but they took some steps and they learned, and then they made adjustments, hopefully, right, in that they became more knowledgeable about what should have been done, what needed to have been done. You both brought up the point that there's been a willful effort. It's been intentional when it comes to women in music and in some aspects of society. I'm just wondering why that education didn't necessarily allow for those kinds of adjustments to be made. Why, in a subsequent release of Your Love, Adrian's name is not listed, on the record label and given fair attribution and credit. And I'm not saying
Right.
it's anybody's fault. I'm just curious about your thoughts about the why.
Well, I think that there's a double standard, Kevin. So it's kind of like in a business community, a man can come into a boardroom and he can be assertive and he can pound on the desk and he can do all kinds of things. And people like, that's a baller. He does that. Have a woman come into the boardroom and do the same thing. That's a bitch. Stay away from her. I mean, let's keep it real. So there were women who were in the house music, community who would get a reputation as difficult, or what, and don't be a black woman working with white producers. It's like it just doubles, like, and they would get iced out. And now that's just, like I say, it's a microcosm of the sexism that is experienced everywhere. And so how do you deal with that? um if I am if I feel like I'm not benefiting from it, like, a lot of these early house music producers, the men who were getting the raw end of the stick, unfortunately, because they were getting not getting the credit that they deserved and really trying to fight for their rights, and then to try to pull up the women who are also not getting what they deserved. It was a tall order. And so if anybody was going to get left off, it was the woman. It was the background singer, it was the co-producer, it was the co-writer. And then there's communities of practice and peers. And if I'm not one of those people, if the people don't look like me, I'm not going to sort of draw you into that. And if you have very few women doing it in the first place, then it becomes something that's just like too much trouble. So the women who could have achieved that level as singers, artists, producers, writers, they simply had other things to do. You know what I'm saying? When it becomes just so hard, it's like, okay, I'm not getting credit, I'm not getting paid. You know, these people don't like me. They think I'm a bitch. You know what? I'll just go get a real job. And that's what happened. That's what happened to a lot of the women in the early house music community.
Yeah. I yeah,
I
I'm without words, but I want Lauren to add to that thread.
Yeah, I think when I talk to the women who I'm familiar with who are involved in the house music scene, sort of behind the scenes, I think if you don't have a strong male advocate, like your brother is in the industry, like your husband is in the industry, your husband that actually respects you in the industry, then it's very difficult to sort of stand your ground sometimes. And I think about, so if you think about too, sort of the role of women over the course of the last, I don't know, 5,000 years of recorded history, women without question have been socialized to be number two and to be behind the scenes and to be supportive of men. And I think at a certain point, you become I think at a certain point, I think many of the women, you just become exhausted with the fight to be heard and to be respected and to, add more value to something because, of course, you weren't necessarily respected in the first place. And I think if we probably ask the men behind the scenes too, I think they all sort of, when we talk to some of these women sort of behind the scenes, they all felt like their contributions were valuable. Again, Chippy came, reached out to Kim Salter, knew she could sing, knew these kinds of things, and sort of wanted her to be a part of this project. But when it becomes, sort of a monetary, a capitalistic, sort of endeavor instead of just a creative one, then it's like, how do we erase somebody else who's going to make money on this and that kind of thing. And I don't think, again, I think sometimes it's willful, but it's almost like the talk we were having earlier about, um, you know, other communities suggesting that they couldn't be racist because they had Black friends. I grew up with Black people. My best friend is Black. Probably very similar with men who say, "Oh, I love women. I got a great mom. I got these wonderful sisters." But then adding sort of make in your head believing that someone has equal talent, maybe more talent, might be a very different ball game. So I just
Yeah.
think that you have to sort of think about those things. Um, I have some other points as well as it pertains to that. But Kevin, thank you so much for this conversation. And number one, number two, next Women's Month, we need all panel discussions, all women, each one of you on the shows where we talk about these different sort of things. I think that's the one programming note that I'm taking from this conversation right away.
No doubt. And so I the response to that question definitely resonates. I mean, I could see and think and recall instances of exactly what you all described, and it's hurtful. But again, the opportunity for change and to be change agents, uh, certainly you both as women and me as a male, someone who is I'm certainly that son, that husband, that father and brother, uh, because I am surrounded by
Mhm.
people I love and respect that are women. Certainly an advocate, an ally,
Right.
a champion for equity. But I recognize not everyone is that, and certainly ego, the male ego in particular,
Hmm.
is the thing. Hey, look, I'm putting it out there. It's
Right.
a real issue,
Did you say
and I
Did
E-
you say
Ego.
I
ego?
said
We
the
need a
ego
graphic. Where's the graphic up there that says ego?
and and the id. The id is another
Yes.
element of that, that component. But
Yeah.
then you throw in fame, and then you have an
Money.
issue like
Money.
yes, money and
Right.
fame. Then you have an issue like that of Martha Elaine Walsh, one of the most famous instances of intentional omission in our genre of
Right.
music. Martha Wash was, of course, one half of Two Tons of Fun, a background singer for Sylvester, part of the Weather Girls,
Mm-hmm.
and most notably, she was the voice on "Gonna Make You Sweat," and was omitted. She was denied credit. She was denied royalties for
That's
those.
so crazy.
It is, if
Right.
anyone in this business should learn, right,
Right.
from both male and female, that is the case study. Go.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, listen, I agree. We talked about Martha Wash. I'm sure she's not the only one. I mean, there's so many women who've been contributors in big and small ways that they just don't get the credit. One thing I'll say, Kevin, is I have a few thoughts on sort of the talent piece. Um, you know, there I bless his heart, one of my friends, Leonard Remix Roy, who I love dearly with his controversial self. Uh, he was one of the first people to use YouTube in a substantial way to talk about house music, way before anybody else was doing this. This was in the early 2000s. And y'all might remember he did a series where he just talked about DJs, like DJs from back in the day. So he was talking about DJs from the 80s.
Yep.
And he does one on Lori Branch. And it was sort of a unique thing because I had people like calling me going, "There's a guy on the internet talking about you." It was the internet still relatively new, right? All that. And I remember the story is very kind, but it also is indicative of how women DJs were seen, right? Which is he catches me. I was doing a gig at Chicago State, and he thought that I was just helping with the setup. And so he comes up to me and he's like, "Well, who's the DJ tonight?" And I was like, "Well, I'm the DJ." And he goes, "Oh, okay. Well, let's see how this goes." Uh, kind of laughingly, a girl DJ. He even says this. You can look it up on YouTube. He tells the story. And then I play, and I'd been practicing my mixes. Everything was on point, and he was like, shocked and surprised that what a girl knows how to mix, and she knows how to loop records, and she knows how to do tricks and all this stuff. And he said that it made him step up his game because a girl DJ, like he was just astonished that a woman could have it in their brain to have the technical acumen to actually blend two records. It is both very flattering and incredibly typical, of thinking of that time. And I would say of this time, that there is still, I still get that. I still get that. And it
Lori,
is 2023.
I I want to interject here, and I know you've shared this with the Vintage House audience
Mhm.
before, but talk about the impetus for you becoming a DJ, right? In the Vertigo team.
Yeah, well, no, we were in the social club. Social club cliques were the thing in the early 80s. And my club was using other DJs. We used, of course, Wayne Williams and Chosen Few DJs. And I was collecting music. And Eric Bradshaw, bless his heart, remember the founder of our club, and Craig Loftus were like, why don't we have our own DJs? And Lori, you're so into music, why don't you DJ? And I'm like, yeah, why don't I DJ? There weren't any other women doing it. It was a little bit gimmicky at the time. Like we were thinking, well, we'd be the first ones to have a woman, actually DJing. Yeah, that's true. But I really loved it. And, Jose Gomez, also known as Louis Gomez, became part of our crew, actually taught us how to do it. And it was nerve-wracking and thrilling. And I realized right away that, this is something that not everybody can do, but fortunately I could. And I was not the smartest student. I barely got out of high school, you know, but this was something I was good at, and I'm like, wow, I can do this, and people are into it. It's intoxicating, just getting that feeling from the crowd. And so I recognize that yeah, being a woman in this industry is important, and I wanted to show up that way.
And talk about, Louis Gomez and Eric
Hmm.
Bradshaw, and of course, friend of the Vintage House Show,
Yes.
Craig Loftus. Their belief in you to take the reins on
Yeah.
the decks. They were both allies, I would say, unbiased in their
Yes.
thinking. And talk about what that mentality was like from those guys.
Well,
And I know they're not here to
no,
tell it.
they're not here to tell the story, but we should bring them on as a
Yeah,
vertical reunion. But I will
love
say
that.
this, that let me just talk about my friends. So I think about John Pierre Campbell, who went to Lindblom with me, who was my first started as my DJ partner, ended up being my fashion consultant and curator. Um, and Eric Bradshaw, who also we were all Lindblom students, who went to Lindblom with me, was new expression writer for Chippy was his buddy. He started Vertigo, and then Craig Loftus from St. Brill Abroad Catholic School on the South Side. We had a little crew. Another gentleman, Stephen Moore. One thing that many of them had in common, most of them had in common, was they were part of the queer community. And we didn't call it back then. That was a slur. We didn't use that terminology. We didn't really have a terminology because we were all kind of figuring ourselves out. But suffice it to say is that they were different than most people. And they had an openness and curiosity about life that was unusual and attractive to me, which is why I joined the team. And there was not that type of division, the not type of the typical male female division. They were like, you're interested, let's get you equipment, let's get someone who show you how to do it and see if you can. And it was just that simple, Kevin. It was just that simple. If you can do it, then you will be our DJ. And their support and love was what made it happen. And I know that happened for other women as well. Lauren, I want to get to your point about sort of the surrogate people, the people who speak on your behalf, or the people who brought you up. So I think about, Chrissy Hutchison, who her husband, actually, Chrissy told me this story years ago when I was doing a party at the Penthouse, and she was very young, maybe 14, 15 years old. And or it's just when she first started dating Hugo. I think they were both in high school, and she was not inside the club, she was outside the club. And Hugo was saying, see, there's a woman doing this, this is what you can be doing too. um, and he was able to help her, to help facilitate that by having, a sponsor of sorts. The same for Kenya Lenore, who was a co-writer and a voice on Rick Lenore's great classic hit, whose name I'm forgetting right now. You Can't Stop the House, right? And he did that for her, as did Steve did for Angie. So there was always somebody. You were right about that. That there, in order to sort of gain entry into the club, you did have to have a male spokesperson. I don't know if any women, not back then, kind of just showed up on the scene and made it. Now things may have been different, when the scene involved like people like Terry Bristol and Psycho Bitch in like 82, 83, 84 when they were doing Medusas. Things were starting to shift around that time, and you were seeing more women bringing other women on to the scene. But before that, it was very, very, I mean, it continues to be, but it was very male dominated, and you had to have sort of a male sponsor to say this person, can DJ.
I think, in the course of our 7, 8 years of doing 400 interviews, what I try to take out are trends. What's going on with these trends? How are these women? And as a woman, I'm always thinking about women, whether I highlight that or not. But I've always really attempted to sort of really listen when women are talking to me about their entry into the music. So, whether we're talking about, behind the scenes, the Fantastic Four, Terry Bristol, Lori Branch, who were our first guests really on the Vintage House show. I always tried to listen to what they were talking about. And we had this event in 2015. I don't know if everyone can see this event on the screen. I don't know if it'll stay, may not. But we had an event in 2015 where we talked to women. We talked to Lori Branch, Celeste the DJ, First Lady, Von Zell Augusto, and Terry Bristol. And what we recognize, what I think the trend that I saw here a lot was, um, oh my God, Andre Hatchett was was influential in quite a few other folks. Andre Hatchett threw Celeste, the DJ, on the deck, said, "I'm leaving, carry on," and she did. Vanzell Augusto, I guess, also went to Kenwood with Andre. I believe that was the story, and they started, so doing a few things together. There's always someone who is bringing, some man sort of bringing women into this field. Now, Psycho Bitch, Terry Bristol, I can't remember exactly their stories, but I know they definitely were, sort of working, sort of the club scene. But I'm not 100% sure. But I think if we go back, we'll probably. I wonder what we'll hear if we listen back to those stories about who was the impetus to encourage, at least, and say you could do this. I'm wondering about that. I can't remember right now, but I think that that's the case across the board. Generally, sort of the last 50 to 100 years, is some man made, some direction, and then you can, if they encourage you, then they put you out there. Now, again, whether that's
Right.
the vocalist or whatever or not, and then again, I don't know how that over time, how those relationships continue, that kind of thing. But that's what I've heard, sort of over time. And I definitely want to go back to our Terry Bristol discussion
Mm-hmm.
and all those discussions and really sort of think about that. And I really, though, am curious, as we're talking about history, though, I do want to sort of fast
Mm-hmm.
forward to Women's History Month 2020 or
Mm-hmm.
2021, where we did a Women's History Month after show spotlight, where we highlighted sort of five wonderful young women
Mm-hmm.
DJs. And that's how we were introduced to DJ Mo Mami. So love
Right.
to DJ Mo Mami. Want to give her some love.
Yay.
Shout out.
She
She's
brought
great.
us, yeah, she's
Babes
awesome.
Only is the name of their collective.
Babes
Babes
only.
Only.
Yep.
What's up?
And they actually had a whole sort of month of events. They still have events going on this year. They're spinning everywhere, they're talking everywhere. But she brought in some really wonderful DJs, young DJs. And we only had a small amount of time to talk to them about, because we had them spinning, or it was COVID too, so they sometimes brought in, sent in their videos and that kind of thing. But we really didn't get in depth into, how they were introduced, to wanting to spin. And I think what we're going to see a little bit is that trajectory has changed, where it was a man saying, "Hey, I want to do this." I would love to talk to VD Girl too. It's almost like, so their parents, they heard this house music, they were like, "What is this about?" I know Queen used to have sessions, and we've had them at our show before, where they had DJ mentoring sessions for women, and those who identify as women, which I learned a lot from. I was just learning those whole things, guys. I was like, now there's a guy in here, he identified as a woman, so he was allowed to be a part of that cohort that was learning to spin. So, I think things are changing a little bit. I don't know, Lori, what do you think? Are things changing a little bit?
Oh, I think things are changing a lot. We, Lady D, VD Girl and I have hosted a number of events, but one of which where we welcome anybody who is part of the feminine energy. And what I mean by that is that might be biologically born women, trans women, non-binary women. That we're all welcome, because it's part of that same energy to sort of empower, people who have been marginalized and set on the sidelines for a long time. So that is important to us, and that's what we're going to continue to do. And definitely much love to Mo Mami and all the women that she's putting on. She's had a great guest just this week. And so Vintage House is going to do that. And people ask us, what are we doing? You have to watch the show to find out. But we're doing a lot.
There's no doubt. The vintagehouseshow.com is where everyone, of course, if you miss a show, you can download podcasts. Of course, visiting our pages on Facebook and YouTube as well to see some of these incredible conversations. I want to switch gears a little bit and flip the script, as there have been boss women. That term I use loosely. I'm not sure yet if I'm a fan or not of the term, but the intent is to reflect those women who are decision makers in the genre, that are calling shots and building lucrative careers, either for themselves or with others. So what's interesting, I can quickly kick off this conversation with the fact that the founder of the Dance Music Research and Archiving Foundation and the Vintage House Show, Lauren Lowery, invited Lori first, so put her into the mix, and a few years later, I got to join the fold as well. And so I appreciate the vision, the confidence in that decision. But what's interesting to the point is that you enabled me to have this platform. And I've seen that happen a lot. I take someone like Gladys Pizarro out in New York who was influenced by what was happening at Trax Records and DJ International when she and Finkelstein created Strictly Rhythm Records, right? And they have their track record in dance music is certainly unmatched and unparalleled, I think, in terms of some of the releases and impact that they've had. But there are many others. I've had and been fortunate to have on the show Kim Mazel, who is claiming, queen of house music on one level and in one dimension. And Lori and I had a great conversation with her along with DJ Alicia during a Women's History Month. So I'm going to pause there and also introduce, I think, Lauren, you also have a copy of this incredible book, Lady of the House, Stories of Women in Dance Music. And of course, your cover is different color. I didn't realize
Yeah,
that.
it's pretty cool.
110 is our very own co-host and colleague and partner, Lori Branch, is on page 110
It
there.
also awesome. Thank you.
We're blurred.
It's okay. Hold it next to your face, and we could actually see it. No, who else is in there is Celeste Alexander and First Lady Chrissy Hutchinson.
Chris Hutchinson, First Lady, and Celeste Alexander. I salute all of you and all of the women included here in Lady of the House. If you all don't have a copy, it's compiled by Layla McKenzie and Ian Snowball. Check it out. But to each of you, what are your perspectives on sort of getting a hold of, a ability, right,
Yes.
to make change, make decisions, create a platform
hmm
like Vintage House?
I think we continue to do what we're doing, Kevin, and we are getting better and better at it. So this doesn't happen overnight. You can't, you sort of, you have a vision, which Lauren had many years ago, and we've been fortunate to be a part of her vision and to help to execute it. And that has led to what she described, 400 plus interviews, in-depth interviews. We do this for certainly people's entertainment, but we're doing this to create history and to understand how to unpack history in a way that is unfiltered, that is through our lens, through our community's eyes, and be able to tell the full story. And we'll be doing that in lots of different ways. People have to hear things many times in order for them to get it. The show is one way. There are other products that we're working on. There are other adventures that are yet to come. So we're just getting started. And I think that I'm so faithful and confident and passionate that the stories of these women are going to be told and are going to be preserved for history because we're committed to it. And our team continues to grow. It's not just old house, it's new house. It's who made the history and who's making history, right? That's what we're doing.
Right.
And speaking of that, I do want to give one
Right.
shout out because I might have been the first woman on sort of the Chicago house music scene, mixing records, but I was not the first woman DJ in Chicago. There are other women DJs who were doing all kinds of cool things. They might not have been doing mixing, they might not have been doing house music, but I was also inspired by seeing those women. So women like Phil Thomas, women like Sharon Webb, I would go to to bars. Sometimes these were like lesbian bars or gay bars or underground bars when I was very young, and I would see these women. So I was inspired too by women. They weren't doing the thing that I wanted to do. They were doing part of it. I was informed by that. They weren't ultimately doing like, house music and mixing, but they were doing it. So we've been here for a long time, and we will continue to be.
Well, guys, I'm just so, so happy and proud that we collectively have been able to make our colleagues and our friends aware of how important their contributions to a Black music genre that you all created is. I think part of my goal here was to make sure that everyone understood that history is important, archiving history is important. You all know that I believe in Black history, and house music is Black history. Even as a woman, I do forget that this is also women's history as well. I fall into the same socialization of putting being a woman sort of, secondary or tertiary. But women's history in this is very important too. And I'm going to throw out, being a weird, goofy historian and archivist, this wonderful book that had some fantastic flyers from the 80s. And great, look at this. There's Kim Mazel. Kim Mazel is highlighted here. This is a 1980s flyer of the top 16 Chicago's best artists. Kim Mazel is here. There might be a few other women. Um, look at that. Like, I thought that was so cool. You just brought up Kim Mazel. But I scoured this book to find women. So these party flyers from 1983, etc., I did come up with, and sometimes we sort of put ourselves out too, because Kim Salter, who I continue to mention here, she was Kay Joy. And so she's in this Ron Hardy thing. She was at La Mirage with these folks. But Kay Joy, sometimes, when we're not really saying exactly who we are, we forget that Kay Joy is actually Kim Salter. And, sometimes these nicknames, sometimes they stick, sometimes it's like you don't know whether or not it's gonna, really last forever. So people really know who you are as a DJ or as a vocalist or whatever. So, um, I'm happy that we have succeeded, and really, I think our show, probably more than many, have made many um, house music contributors and pioneers recognize that their artifacts, that their memories are valuable and so important and critical. And so I think more people now are realizing, hey, we've got to preserve, we got to preserve, we got to preserve. And I think that's the overarching goal. We have to do this. And now sort of it's our job to escalate as well and say, how do we use all of this information and put it in a format in which we can all sort of digest it in a unique way? How do we bring this information to the world? Because house music is still not celebrated, certainly in the United States, the way other Black music genres are. So now we have more work to do using these great histories and all of our interviews. And, I'm now desperate to do more work on women's history on this now. I realize we haven't really attacked it the way we should have now that Kevin, you made us think about being a woman. I mean, golly geez.
Well, I do want to say that there have been some epic women that have been interviewed here on the Vintage House Show, and one of them who has global reach and impact is someone that Lowery got to interview. I know you produced that episode, but Lowery, why don't you talk a little bit about one of the contributors to this genre that has certainly helped to elevate.
Ooh.
Big time. So you're talking about Honey Dijon, Honey, uh,
I am, yes.
Honey, yeah, Chicago born and bred, South Side, South suburbs, and what's funny about Honey is, so she got a Grammy, for her work on Beyonce's Renaissance album this year that garnered, I think, 9 awards, maybe more. And she was the producer, contributor to like at least 3 tracks, and no, two for sure. So that was very significant. What I thought was interesting, should I say, is when Chicago's house music community were congratulating Chicago artists on these Grammy wins, and we had three for sure, with Sir the Baptist and Terry Hunter, nominations and awards. Terry Hunter was nominated, Sir the Baptist, won, and Jay Ivy. Not once did I see any of them acknowledge Honey Dijon, who actually won a Grammy. you know. So, I mean, I love y'all. You guys are my friends, but I thought it was kind of interesting that she was not in the mix. It's 2023, and we're still not acknowledging Chicago women's contributions, even when they rise to that level that she's at, with hundreds of thousands of followers, worldwide, millions of views on her YouTubes, and now a Grammy. And I was reading the streams and the feeds, and very few mentions. So we got work to do. And congratulations, honey.
Congratulations indeed. Making no excuses there. I think there's the regional, like localized people who are
Mm-hmm.
um, accessible in the community, and I think there's usually a lot of buzz that
Mm-hmm.
emanates there. And then there's someone who has, and we've had shows and discussions about what happens when a Chicago born and bred artist leaves Chicago
Please.
and
Right.
goes global. These are some of the dimensions of the effect of
I agree.
that global fame, for sure. And I think we talked about it a lot during last year's City of Chicago Chicago House Music Festival, when we brought in
Mm-hmm.
Patrick Moxie,
Mm-hmm.
formerly of Ultra Records, as an example. But there is a much longer story and discussion here.
Yes.
I am thrilled that, again, I was able to have it with my partners in the Vintage House Show. Uh, Clearly, we're gonna do the work, the additional work, to embrace equity within this genre, and ultimately, I think, within our society. I want to thank you, Lauren, and you, Lori, for bringing your invaluable perspectives, your talents, and your gifts to tonight's show.
Well, ditto, Kevin. Thank you for doing all the same. And LL, our executive producer. Woo. Thank you, Lauren, for everything.
Well, thank you all so much. I'm really so proud of all the work you all have done. And I'm so happy you all are really sort of impacting everybody with your interest in them, with the interest in your friends, and they are recognizing how important they are. So you all are really doing the heavy lifting on this. I just didn't realize how much more work we have to do until I started sort of thinking about the subject. So, Kevin, I really appreciate you putting us on, buddy.
Me
Hey,
too.
well, again, I'm looking to make this a more equitable world, for sure. I'm not done yet, though, with Women's History Month. I'm excited to share that, in addition to this powerful show, next week we'll have one of Chicago's female vocalist powerhouses, Miss Dajay, joining us on March
Woo-hoo.
29th for another incredible episode of the Vintage House Show. So
And
stay
thank
tuned.
you. I can looking forward to that. Can I slip in one quick commercial?
Go
So
for it.
this weekend, I'm part of Teresa Griffin's Wonderful Women event.
Nice.
So y'all should check it out. It's Shantae Savage, one of my absolute favorites, is going to be singing along with Teresa Griffin. It's going to be Saturday. It's called the Wonderful Women Weekend at Boudoir Hip Lounge, 9333 South Cicero. It's in the hotel there. So I hope y'all can consider joining. And I'll also be well, by the time this airs, it'll be over. So anyway, try to make that. Lots happening right at the end of the month, and I'll be on the Tennessee show, House in the Mid South. So that's coming up
Awesome.
next week.
Very good. Well, again, we're here every Wednesday night, 10 p.m. Central, for the Vintage House Show. And in case you miss it, we are available at vintagehouseshow.com, available wherever you get your favorite podcasts, and of course, YouTube and twitch.tv, The Vintage House Show. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.